The crystal glasses clinked softly as laughter echoed through the Golden Palm Country Club's private dining room. Victoria Blackwood sat at her usual corner table, surrounded by four other women who all came from the same wealthy world as her. The evening sun painted golden streaks across their expensive dresses and designer jewelry. Victoria took another sip of her champagne, feeling slightly bored. At 32, she had everything money could buy: a penthouse apartment, a closet full of designer clothes, and a successful career as a hedge fund manager. But nights like these were starting to feel empty. "Oh my God, did you hear about Sarah Mitchell?" Jessica, one of her friends, leaned forward with excitement in her eyes. "She's dating her personal trainer. Can you imagine?" The other women gasped and giggled, but Victoria just rolled her eyes. "So what? At least she's happy." Happy? Monica, the most outspoken of the group, nearly spilled her drink. "Please, Victoria, these relationships never work out. You can't mix different social classes. It's like trying to mix oil and water." Victoria straightened in her chair. Something about Monica's confident tone bothered her. "That's not true. Love doesn't care about bank accounts." The women around the table exchanged knowing looks. They had all known Victoria since their private school days, and they recognized the stubborn expression on her face. It was the same look she got before making a risky investment or taking on a challenging client. "Oh, really?" Monica raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Want to put your money where your mouth is?" The room suddenly grew quiet. Even the soft piano music playing in the background seemed to fade away. Victoria felt all eyes on her as she set down her glass. "What do you mean?" Monica's red lips curved into a smile. "Let's make a bet. You're always talking about how true love conquers all. Prove it." "I'm listening." Victoria's competitive nature was already awakening, drowning out the small voice in her head that warned her this might be a bad idea. "Marry the next working-class man you meet," Monica said, her words cutting through the quiet room. "Stay married for 1 year. If you make it, I'll donate $1 million to your favorite charity. If you fail, you donate the same amount to mine." The other women gasped. Even for their wealthy circle, $1 million was serious money. Victoria should have said no. She should have laughed it off and changed the subject. But the champagne had loosened her judgment, and Monica's smug expression was too irritating to ignore. "Fine," Victoria said, lifting her chin. "But I set some ground rules. He has to be employed, never been married before, and no criminal record. I'm not completely crazy." "Deal." Monica pulled out her phone. "Let's get this in writing. Proper contracts, like the businesswomen we are." As their lawyers exchanged late-night messages and drew up the agreement, Victoria maintained her confident smile, but inside, her mind was racing. What had she just agreed to? The next morning, Victoria arrived at her office building earlier than usual. Her head was pounding from the champagne, and she barely slept. As she walked through the quiet lobby, she heard the soft whirring of a floor polisher. That's when she saw him. A man in a gray uniform was carefully cleaning the marble floors. He moved with quiet efficiency, completely focused on his work. Unlike the loud, showy men Victoria usually met, there was something peaceful about him. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and strong hands that guided the cleaning machine with gentle skill. Victoria stood frozen, her designer heels silent on the polished floor. According to the bet, this man, this janitor, would have to be her husband. Her first instinct was to turn around and come back later, to pretend she never saw him, but something made her stay. The man looked up, noticing her presence. He quickly turned off the machine and gave her a polite nod. "Good morning, ma'am. Don't worry, the floor is already dry." "I'm Victoria," she said, her voice coming out softer than usual. "What's your name?" He seemed surprised by her interest but gave her a gentle smile. "Marcus. Marcus Chen." And with those 3 words, the game began. What Victoria didn't know was that this game would change her life in ways she never expected. Victoria spent the next 3 days watching Marcus from a distance. She learned his schedule. He arrived at 4:30 a.m. to clean the lobby and first 3 floors before most employees started their day. He always brought his own lunch in a warm blue container, and he sat alone in the building's small courtyard to eat it. On Thursday morning, Victoria put her plan into action. She wore her most casual designer outfit, a simple black dress that still cost more than Marcus probably made in a month. She arrived at the building at 4:45 a.m., carrying 2 paper coffee cups from the expensive cafe down the street. "Good morning, Marcus," she called out, trying to sound natural. "I brought you coffee. Black. I noticed that's how you drink it in the break room." Marcus looked up from the floor he was mopping, surprise clear on his face. "Thank you, Ms. Blackwood. But you didn't have to do that. Please call me Victoria." She held out the coffee with her best smile, the one that usually convinced difficult clients to trust her with millions of dollars. But Marcus didn't seem impressed by her smile. Instead, he looked at her with gentle curiosity. "Why are you here so early, Victoria?" The question caught her off guard. She had prepared a whole story about extra work and early meetings, but something in his honest gaze made her hesitate. "I couldn't sleep," she said, surprising herself with the truth. Marcus nodded, accepting the coffee with careful hands. Sometimes the quiet hours before dawn are the best time to think. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. Victoria noticed things about Marcus she hadn't seen from far away: a small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his uniform had been carefully ironed despite its age, how his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "What did you do before this?" she asked, genuinely curious now. There was something about the way he spoke that suggested education. "I was a teacher in Taiwan," Marcus said, his voice warm with memory. "Literature and English. But when my mother got sick 5 years ago, I moved here to be close to my aunt who could help care for her. This job pays better than teaching ESL without certificates, and it has good health insurance." Victoria felt something twist in her chest. She had expected a simple story, something she could use to play her role better. Instead, she found herself wanting to know more. "Do you miss teaching?" "Every day," Marcus smiled. "But I still teach, in my way. I volunteer at the community center on weekends, helping new immigrants learn English. It's not the same as discussing great novels with students, but it's meaningful work." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Monica. "How's the husband hunt going? Remember, time's ticking." Reality crashed back. This wasn't a real conversation. It was part of her plan. She needed to stay focused. "Would you like to have coffee again tomorrow?" she asked quickly. "Maybe in the courtyard. I could bring breakfast." Marcus studied her face for a long moment. "Victoria," he said gently, "you seem like a kind person, but I have to ask, why are you really interested in talking to me?" Victoria felt her carefully constructed plan starting to crack. "What do you mean?" "I've worked here for 3 years," Marcus said. "I've cleaned your office many times while you worked late. You never noticed me before. Why now?" Victoria's heart raced. She had underestimated him. I guess I'd finally opened my eyes," she said, hating how false the words felt. But Marcus just smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. Sometimes the best things in life happen when we least expect them, even if they start for the wrong reasons. Victoria stared at him, wondering if he somehow knew about the bet. But that was impossible. "Tomorrow then," Marcus said, picking up his mop. "But instead of fancy cafe food, I'll bring breakfast. My mother made extra dumplings yesterday." As Victoria walked to her office, her designer heels clicking on the freshly cleaned floor, she felt more confused than ever. She had planned to charm Marcus with her money and status. Instead, he had seen right through her act and offered simple dumplings in return. For the first time since making the bet, Victoria wondered if she might be the one in danger of getting hurt. Over the next few weeks, early morning meetings with Marcus became the best part of Victoria's day. She found herself waking up eager to get to the office, something that surprised her longtime doorman who was used to seeing her leave at 9 or 10. One quiet morning, they sat in the courtyard sharing the steamed buns Marcus had brought. The early summer air was fresh, and birds chirped in the small trees around them. "Tell me about your favorite book," Victoria said, watching him carefully fold his napkin. She had started asking him questions like this, enjoying how his eyes lit up when he talked about literature. "Ah," Marcus smiled, looking up at the sky. "It's The Little Prince. I know it's a children's book, but the message is very deep. It talks about how the most important things in life can't be seen with eyes, only with the heart." Victoria thought about the expensive art hanging in her penthouse, chosen by her decorator to impress guests. "I've never read it." "Really?" Marcus reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a small, well-loved book. "Here. This is my English copy. I read it to my mother to help her learn. Victoria took the book carefully. No one had lent her anything in years. People in her world either gave expensive gifts or nothing at all. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. Books are meant to be read, not preserved, Marcus said gently. Like people, they become more beautiful with use. That night, Victoria curled up on her designer couch and opened the book. She meant to read just a few pages, but found herself drawn into the story. When her phone buzzed with a message from Monica asking about her charity project, their code for the bet, Victoria ignored it. The next morning, Victoria arrived with tears in her eyes. I finished it, she said, holding out the book to Marcus. He looked at her wet eyes and smiled. Keep it a little longer. Sometimes we need to read a story twice to really understand it. As days turned into weeks, Victoria found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. She told Marcus about her parents sending her to boarding school at 7, about eating lunch alone because the other girls made fun of her braces and glasses. She talked about how she built her tough image at work, making herself so valuable that no one dared bully her anymore. Marcus listened without judgment, sometimes sharing his own stories, about leaving his teaching career, about helping his mother through chemotherapy, about the joy of seeing his English students succeed. One morning, Victoria arrived to find Marcus teaching one of the night janitors, an elderly woman named Rosa, how to read English signs. The f makes an F sound, he explained patiently. So this says phone, not pone. Victoria stood quietly, watching them. She thought about how different this was from her world, where people stepped over others to climb higher. Here was Marcus, tired after his shift, taking time to help someone else succeed. That afternoon, Victoria had lunch with her wealthy friends at their usual expensive restaurant. As they complained about their maids and drivers, she found herself thinking about Rosa learning to read. Victoria, you're awfully quiet, Jessica noted. How's your little project going? Victoria thought about Marcus's kind eyes and gentle wisdom. She thought about the little prince, and seeing with the heart. It's progressing, she said carefully. Remember? Monica smirked. The bet was for marriage within 3 months. You've got about 4 weeks left. Victoria's stomach twisted. She'd almost forgotten about the bet, almost forgotten that this wasn't real. The next morning, she watched Marcus clean the windows, his movements careful and thorough. He took pride in his work, she realized, just like she took pride in her investments. While her work made money grow, his work made the world a little better, a little cleaner, a little brighter. Victoria? Marcus turned, catching her watching him. Is everything okay? She forced a smile. Yes, just thinking. But everything wasn't okay, because Victoria Blackwood, the woman who had never failed at anything in her life, was failing at her most important task, keeping her heart safe from Marcus Chen. Victoria paced her luxury apartment, staring at her phone. Monica's latest text message glowed on the screen. 2 weeks left. Tick-tock. The bet's deadline was approaching fast, and Victoria felt trapped between two worlds. She hadn't meant to fall for Marcus. It was supposed to be simple. Marry him, prove Monica wrong about love across social classes, and then, what? She hadn't thought that far ahead. Now, after 2.5 months of early morning conversations and shared lunches, the thought of hurting Marcus made her feel sick. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office building with determination in her steps. She found Marcus in their usual spot in the courtyard, reading a book while they ate breakfast. Marcus, she said, her heart racing. What do you think about marriage? He looked up, his eyes thoughtful. Marriage is like a garden, he said slowly. It needs time, care, and patience to grow. Why do you ask? Victoria sat down beside him, her designer dress getting wrinkled on the concrete bench. What if someone felt they didn't need to wait? If they just knew? Marcus closed his book carefully. Victoria, he said gently, are you asking what I think you're asking? Will you marry me? The words came out in a rush. Victoria pulled a small box from her purse. Inside was a simple gold ring she bought yesterday, nothing like the flashy jewelry her friends wore. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Why? It was the question Victoria had been dreading. She couldn't tell him about the bet, but she couldn't lie either. Not to him. Because when I'm with you, I feel real, she said finally. Everyone else sees Victoria Blackwood, the successful hedge fund manager. You just see? Me. People will talk, Marcus warned. Your friends, your colleagues. Let them, Victoria said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Marcus took the ring box from her hands and opened it. My mother always says that crazy decisions make the best stories, he said with a small smile. Yes, Victoria, I will marry you. The next week passed in a blur. Victoria arranged everything quickly, ignoring Monica's smug texts about winning the bet. She told her friends she wanted a small private ceremony. The truth was, she couldn't bear to have them there, watching with their judging eyes. On a sunny Tuesday morning, Victoria and Marcus stood in City Hall. She wore a simple white dress, expensive but not showy. Marcus wore a new dark blue suit that his mother had insisted on buying him, even though it stretched her savings. To you, Victoria Blackwood, take Marcus Chen to be your lawfully wedded husband. Victoria looked at Marcus. He smiled at her, that same gentle smile that had first caught her attention. I do, she said clearly. After the ceremony, they went to Marcus's mother's apartment for dinner. Mrs. Chen had cooked all day, filling the small space with delicious smells. The apartment was tiny compared to Victoria's penthouse, but it was warm and full of love. Welcome to our family, Mrs. Chen said in careful English, hugging Victoria. Her eyes were wet with happy tears. They sat around a small table, eating dumplings and noodles. Marcus's aunt had come too, bringing sweet red bean cakes for dessert. They told stories and laughed, and no one asked Victoria about her job or her money. Later that night, in Marcus's childhood bedroom where his mother had insisted they stay, Victoria looked at her new husband. Your family is wonderful, she said softly. They're your family now too, Marcus replied, taking her hand. Victoria felt tears in her eyes. She had won the bet. She and Marcus were married. Monica would have to donate the $1 million to charity. But as she lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment and feeling Marcus's warm hand in hers, Victoria realized she might have lost something much more important: her heart. Because in 3 months, when the bet's 1-year marriage requirement was over, she would have to tell Marcus the truth. And she might lose not just him, but this whole beautiful, simple world she had stumbled into by accident. Living together changed everything. After much discussion, Marcus moved into Victoria's penthouse apartment, though he insisted on still paying his mother's rent. Each morning, they woke up at 4 a.m. together, and Victoria found herself looking forward to these quiet moments before dawn. One morning, while Marcus made coffee in her expensive kitchen, Victoria noticed something strange. Why are you writing in that notebook? She asked, watching him scribble between sips. Marcus looked up with a slight smile. I'm working on a novel, he admitted. I write a little bit each morning before work. It helps me remember who I am. Victoria walked over and peeked at the neat handwriting. The story was in Chinese, but you can see the care in each character. What's it about? An immigrant father trying to give his daughter a better life, Marcus said, closing the notebook gently. Sometimes the smallest stories are the most important ones. That evening, Victoria came home early from work to find Marcus in their spare room, teaching English to 3 elderly Chinese ladies. They sat on cushions on the floor, carefully repeating words after him. Apple, Marcus said slowly. Apple, they echoed, laughing when they got it right. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching. She had never used this room. It was supposed to be for guests, but her friends always stayed in hotels. Now it felt alive, filled with learning and laughter. Victoria, Marcus spotted her. Come meet my students. They work in the restaurant down the street. The ladies smiled shyly at her, and Victoria found herself sitting down on a cushion. Before she knew it, she was learning Chinese words while teaching English ones. When the lesson ended, one of the ladies pressed a container of homemade dumplings into her hands. For sharing your home, she said in broken English. That night, eating the dumplings for dinner, Victoria told Marcus about her own childhood, about the big empty house where she grew up, with parents too busy making money to attend her school plays, about the boarding school where she learned that designer clothes could buy friendship but never real connection. Is that why you work so hard? Marcus asked softly, to prove something? Victoria looked around her expensive apartment, seeing it through new eyes. I guess I thought if I had enough money, I'd finally feel enough. Marcus took her hand. You've always been enough, he said simply. Weeks passed and Victoria's penthouse slowly changed. Marcus's books appeared on the shelves, nestled between her investment guides. His mother visited often, filling the kitchen with cooking smells and teaching Victoria how to make xiaolongbao. The spare room became a classroom, not just for English lessons but for a small community of people helping each other learn and grow. Victoria's friends noticed changes in her too. She stopped attending their weekend brunches, preferring to volunteer with Marcus at the community center. When they asked about her charity case husband, she changed the subject. The bet felt like a distant nightmare now, something from another life. One Saturday, Victoria woke up early and found Marcus's notebook on the kitchen counter. A piece of paper had fallen out, an old photograph. In it, a younger Marcus stood in front of a classroom in Taiwan, surrounded by smiling students holding copies of The Little Prince. Victoria's heart ached. Marcus had given up so much to care for his mother, but he never complained. He just found new ways to teach, to help others, to make the world better in small but important ways. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Marcus enter the kitchen. "Those were my last students in Taiwan," he said quietly. Victoria turned, tears in her eyes. "Do you regret leaving?" Marcus smiled, that same gentle smile she had fallen in love with. "Life gives us different classrooms," he said, gesturing around their home, now filled with signs of learning and community. "Sometimes we teach best by simply being who we are." Victoria looked at her husband, this quiet, wise man who had changed her life in ways she never expected. The bet that brought them together now felt like a cruel joke, because while she had set out to prove that love could cross social classes, Marcus had taught her something far more important. That true wealth had nothing to do with money at all. Monica watched Victoria's Instagram stories with growing anger. There was Victoria teaching Chinese grandmothers how to use computers. Victoria cooking dumplings with her mother-in-law. Victoria and Marcus reading to children at the community center. Victoria looked genuinely happy, and it made Monica's blood boil. "She's actually falling for him," Monica muttered to herself in her luxury office. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and instead of proving Monica right about social classes not mixing, Victoria was proving her terribly wrong. That morning, Monica arrived at Victoria's office building early. She found Marcus in the lobby, carefully polishing the marble floors as he did every morning. "Hello, Marcus," Monica said sweetly. "We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Monica, Victoria's best friend." Marcus straightened up, turning off his cleaning machine. "Nice to meet you," he said politely, though something in Monica's smile made him uneasy. "You know," Monica said, examining her manicured nails, "Victoria's such a good person, always thinking of others. Like when she made that bet with us about marrying someone less fortunate." Marcus felt his heart stop. "What bet?" Monica's eyes gleamed. "Oh dear, she didn't tell you? We bet $1 million that she couldn't marry a working-class man and stay married for a year. She had to marry the next working-class man she met, and that was you." She laughed lightly. "But don't worry, it's for charity." Marcus stood very still, his hands tight on the handle of his cleaning machine. All those early morning meetings, Victoria's sudden interest in him, the rushed marriage proposal, everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. "I should get back to work," he said quietly. "Of course," Monica smiled. "Don't let me keep you from your important duties." Marcus worked through his shift in a daze. Every spot he had shared breakfast with Victoria, every corner where they had talked and laughed, it all felt different now. False. When his shift ended, he didn't go up to their penthouse as usual. Instead, he took the bus to his mother's apartment. Victoria came home that evening to find Marcus sitting at their kitchen table. His work uniform was still on, and a small bag sat by his feet. "Marcus," she said, her heart dropping at his expression. "What's wrong?" "Tell me about the bet," he said softly. Victoria felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Who? Does it matter?" Marcus's voice was tired. "Just tell me the truth, for once." Victoria sank into a chair, her legs weak. "It started as a bet," she whispered. "Monica said love couldn't cross social classes. I wanted to prove her wrong. But Marcus, everything changed. What I feel for you is real." "When were you going to tell me?" Marcus asked. "After the year was up. After you won your bet." "I don't care about the bet anymore," Victoria said desperately. I love you. Marcus finally looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes broke her heart. You know what hurts the most? He said. Not the bet itself, but that you looked at me, at my job, my life, my family, and thought we were something you could use to win a game. That's not what I think anymore, Victoria pleaded. But it's what you thought when you married me. Marcus stood up, picking up his bag. All those mornings when I was sharing my heart with you, you were counting down the days until you won your prize. Please, Victoria reached for him, but Marcus stepped back. I need time, he said. I'm going to stay with my mother. For how long? Marcus paused at the door. I don't know. He looked around their home, at the books they'd shared, the cushions where his students sat, the kitchen where they cooked together. You know, in The Little Prince, the fox says that we are responsible forever for what we have tamed. I opened my heart to you, Victoria. I made you part of my world. What does that say about your responsibility to the truth? The door closed softly behind him, but to Victoria, it sounded like thunder. She stood in their suddenly empty home, surrounded by all her expensive things that now meant nothing at all. Her phone buzzed. A text from Monica. Oops. Did I spoil your little game? Victoria deleted the message without responding. She walked to their bedroom and opened Marcus's side of the closet. His neat row of ironed uniforms was gone, leaving only empty hangers that swayed gently in the air conditioning. Just like her heart, the space felt terribly, impossibly empty. The first week without Marcus felt like walking through fog. Victoria kept making 2 cups of coffee each morning, only to stare at the extra cup until it went cold. Their home, once filled with life and learning, felt as empty as a museum. On Sunday morning, Victoria gathered her courage and went to the community center where Marcus taught English. She didn't expect to find him there. He was probably teaching at his mother's apartment now. But as she stood in the doorway of the classroom, she saw something that made her heart ache. Marcus's students sat quietly at their desks, looking lost. One elderly woman was close to tears. Teacher Marcus sick? She asked Victoria in broken English. Victoria swallowed hard. No, he's taking a break. She looked at their disappointed faces and made a decision. But I can help today, if you want. The next 2 hours were hard. Victoria wasn't a natural teacher like Marcus, but she tried her best. She helped them practice job interview questions, explain confusing English phrases, and even learn some Chinese words in return. After class, she sat alone in the empty room, thinking about all the times she watched Marcus teach. He never made anyone feel small for not knowing something. He celebrated every tiny victory, every new word learned, every small step forward. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She got up and wrote a long email to her company's board of directors. Then she started researching education programs for immigrants. The next morning, Victoria walked into her office and straight to her boss's room. I'm stepping down as hedge fund manager, she announced. Her boss stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're at the peak of your career. I want to start a foundation, Victoria explained, using my investment skills to help immigrant education programs, and I'm donating half my savings as startup funding. Word spread quickly through her wealthy social circle. At lunch, Monica cornered her at their usual expensive restaurant. Have you gone crazy? Monica hissed. First you actually fall for the janitor, and now you're throwing away your career. Over a bet. Victoria looked at her old friend calmly. You know what's crazy, Monica? Thinking that money makes us better than other people. Marcus taught me more about success in 6 months than I learned in 20 years of chasing wealth. He's gone, Monica reminded her cruelly. You lost him. Maybe, Victoria agreed. But I'm not doing this to win him back. I'm doing it because it's right. Over the next few weeks, Victoria worked harder than she ever had. She set up the New Beginnings Education Foundation, focusing on providing education and job training for immigrants. She used her business connections to create partnerships with companies willing to hire program graduates. She kept teaching at the community center every Sunday. Her students slowly improved, and she learned something new from them every week. She understood now why Marcus loved teaching. There was something magical about helping someone find their voice in a new language. One rainy morning, Victoria was helping one of her students practice for a job interview when she heard a familiar voice from the doorway. Your teaching style has improved. Victoria turned to see Marcus's mother standing there, watching her with thoughtful eyes. "Mrs. Chen," Victoria said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything." The older woman came into the room and sat down. "Marcus told me about the bet," she said in careful English. "It hurt him very much." "I know," Victoria whispered. "But," Mrs. Chen continued, "he also told me how you've changed. How you help people now. How you understand things you didn't before." Victoria wiped her eyes. "I was so stupid. I thought I could prove something about love crossing social classes, but I was the one who needed to learn about real love." Mrs. Chen reached out and patted Victoria's hand. "Sometimes we must lose everything to find what is real inside us." She stood up slowly. "Marcus teaches at the library on Wednesdays now. 4 o'clock. As Mrs. Chen left, Victoria sat very still, her heart beating fast. She didn't know if Marcus would ever forgive her. But for the first time, she understood that this journey wasn't just about winning him back. It was about becoming someone worthy of the love he had shown her. 1 year had passed since Victoria first met Marcus in the building lobby. The marble floors still shone each morning, but a different janitor polished them now. Victoria stood looking at those floors, remembering everything that had changed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Monica. "Time's up. You lost the bet and your husband. Guess I was right about social classes after all." Victoria deleted the message without responding. The bet's deadline didn't matter anymore. Nothing about her old life mattered the way it used to. She walked to the library, her steps both sure and nervous. Through the window, she could see Marcus teaching a group of students. He stood at a whiteboard, explaining something with the same gentle patience she remembered. Her heart ached at how natural he looked there, how right. Victoria had spent the past 6 months building her foundation, but she'd also spent them watching Marcus from afar. She knew he'd quit his janitor job and now taught English full-time at 3 different community centers. He used his savings to take teaching certification courses. His mother had told her all this during their weekly dim sum meetings that Marcus didn't know about. Taking a deep breath, Victoria walked into the library. The lesson was just ending, and students were packing up their books. Some of them smiled at her. They knew her from the community center. Marcus looked up. He'd lost weight, and there were new lines around his eyes, but his smile was still gentle when he saw her. Victoria. "Hello, Marcus." She stayed by the door, giving him space. "Your mother told me you got your teaching certificate." "Yes." He erased the whiteboard slowly. "And I heard about your foundation. You're doing good work." "I learned from the best." Victoria took a careful step forward. "Marcus, I know I hurt you terribly. What I did was cruel and stupid. But that bet, it changed my whole life. Just not in the way I expected." Marcus put down the eraser and turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "I thought I was going to prove something about love crossing social classes. Instead, I learned that I was the one who needed to change. You showed me a whole different way of measuring success, of living life." Victoria's voice shook. "I'm not the same person who made that bet." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I've been watching too. My students tell me about your classes, about the foundation. My mother tells me everything else." Victoria smiled despite her tears. "She's a wonderful spy." "She likes you better than me now," Marcus said, and there was a hint of his old humor in his voice. "I miss you," Victoria whispered. "Not just as my husband. I miss my best friend, the person who taught me about seeing with the heart." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a familiar book. The Little Prince. It was the same copy he had given her so long ago. "Do you remember what the fox says about taming?" he asked. "That we are responsible forever for what we have tamed," Victoria quoted softly. "Yes, but he also says something else." Marcus opened the book to a market page. "He says that the time you spent on your rose is what makes your rose unique, that the love you give to something is what makes it special." Victoria held her breath as Marcus continued. "I spent a lot of time being angry," he said. "Not just about the bet, but about feeling foolish for falling in love so quickly. But then I realized, what we built together wasn't foolish, it was real. The time we spent together, the love we found, that was all real." "It was," Victoria agreed. "It still is. At least for me." Marcus closed the book gently. "Would you like to get coffee? There's a small place around the corner. We could talk." "I'd like that," Victoria said. Then she smiled. But maybe I could cook dinner for you instead. Your mother's been teaching me how to make your favorite dishes. Marcus laughed, a real laugh that made his eyes crinkle just like she remembered. You've been taking cooking lessons from my mother? I had to learn somehow. Love isn't just about grand gestures. It's about dumplings and morning coffee and teaching someone to read. Victoria held out her hand. I'd like to show you who I've become, if you'll let me. Marcus looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. In a small library classroom, two people who had lost their way were finding it again, one gentle step at a time. And somewhere, a little prince was smiling, knowing that sometimes the most precious things in life are the ones we have to learn to see with our hearts.